Okay, so just while everybody is joining, I'm just going to make a start with some of the introductions. So thank you all for attending today's ISBNPA webinar titled How to Recruit Diverse Populations into Research Studies. The webinar today is presented by the Special Interest Group Cancer Prevention and Management. We have 3 speakers for today's webinar, and it will be in the format of a panel discussion. And the plan is for each speaker to briefly introduce themselves and their background, and then we will have around 40 minutes for a panel discussion, which I will be facilitating, and we will leave some time for questions at the end as well. We have also set up a hashtag for today's webinar, and the hashtag is in the top right-hand side of the screen here. So it's just ISBNPA CPM, and it will be included on all of the introduction slides that I'll be presenting, just in case anybody wants to make a note of it if they plan on tweeting today. I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to the webinar and cover some general housekeeping just before we move on to the speakers, and this will just help us to run the webinar as efficiently as possible. Okay, so as part of ISBNPA, these webinars are organised as an extra service for our members, and these webinars are organised by the special interest groups of ISBNPA. And you can see a full list of the special interest groups and how to join them on the ISBNPA website, and the link to access that information is on the screen there. On the website, you'll also find information about upcoming webinars, and you'll also be able to access recordings of webinars conducted in the past. So just to give you a very brief overview of the Cancer Prevention and Management Special Interest Group, the aim of this group is to promote lifestyle interventions and behaviour change. And as part of this, it covers cancer prevention, screening, early detection and lifestyle interventions for people that are living with and beyond cancer. And the group also aims to develop a multidisciplinary international group of researchers who combine the expertise of relevant behavioural, physical activity and nutritional disciplines. And obviously all of these factors are really important for informing policy, public health and for developing interventions as well. So just to give you a brief overview of the group, so the group is made up of the following executive team. Linda is the chair of the group and Becca is the deputy chair. Christina is the immediate past chair to Linda, and Cindy is our secretary and Zan is our treasurer. Emily is the communications officer for our group, and Jordan is the social media officer, and I am the webinar officer for the group. So I'm just going to move on really briefly to Becca, who will discuss the UK Society for Behavioural Medicine. So Becca, over to you.
Thanks, Hannah, and welcome everyone. So the UK Society for Behavioural Medicine is a network in the UK of academic and clinical health researchers who are interested in applying knowledge, theory and evidence on health-related behaviours to improve the health and well-being of people in the UK and beyond. And the Cancer SIG, which I co-chair with Jo Waller and Teresa Corbett, is very much aligned to the ISBNPA CPM SIG. So our mission is to provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, knowledge, information and best practice for those interested in the application of behavioural medicine to the prevention of cancer, the screening and early diagnosis of cancer and health behaviours among those living with and beyond cancer. And this cuts across a number of behaviours, including smoking, alcohol, energy balance, HPV vaccination, cancer screening participation and symptomatic help-seeking behaviours. And by bringing together researchers, clinicians, third sector organisations and public or patient representatives, we hope to facilitate the exchange of information on diverse aspects of cancer and to enhance networks and collaborations and ultimately accelerate progress towards an improvement in cancer outcomes. And we're particularly looking to support early career researchers in this area. And so we're working with relevant SIGs from other societies such as SBM and ISBNPA to try and raise the profile of behavioural science within cancer research. and cancer research within behavioural science communities through events such as today's webinar. And if you're interested in our work, then you can follow our hashtag on Twitter as well, which is hashtag UKSPM CancerSig. And I think I'm going to hand over to Linda now.
Great, thank you, Becca. So I'm representing the Society of Behavioral Medicine today on behalf of the Physical Activity Special Interest Group as a former SIG chair. So SBM is one of the leading groups of multidisciplinary professionals dedicated to improving the quality of life and health through behavioral medicine. There are several interest groups within SBM, and the Physical Activity SIG is one of them. So the mission of the Physical Activity SIG is to update members on the latest initiatives relevant to the physical activity field, provide a format for both formal and informal networking among members with physical activity interests. And it serves as a forum for advancing physical activity research through developing submissions for the SBM conference that just passed last month, mentorship opportunities to junior members and trainees, and dissemination of healthy living and public-facing articles, to name a few. If you're interested in learning more about the Physical Activity SIG, there is a Twitter page, and I draw your attention to the Twitter page here at the very bottom. Also, on another note, for those of you who are planning on attending ISBNPA this year in Uppsala in Sweden, it would be great if you could join our Cancer Prevention and Management Business Meeting, which is held on Friday, June 16th from 11:15 a.m. to 11:45, and that's in room K3 to 4. So that's on level 3, and the room number is K3 to 4. We'll be sending a newsletter out right before the conference with these details as well, and it will be outlined in the conference program. Thank you so much. So I'll pass it back to Hannah.
That's great. Thank you so much, Becca and Linda, for introducing that. So for today's webinar, you'll all be muted apart from the speakers and the organisers, and this just helps us to prevent noise during the talks. If you do have any questions or comments for any of our speakers, please either put your questions in the Q&A function or virtually raise your hand. But please bear in mind that we will only get round to questions after the panel discussion is finished. Okay, so moving on to today's speakers. So today we have a panel discussion with Dr Jamie Studts, Dr Lee Green and Dr Shoba Dawson. Dr Studts is a clinical health psychologist by training and a professor in the Division of Medical Oncology at the University of Colorado. Dr Green is a senior member of the Department of Health Outcomes and Behaviour at the Moffitt Cancer Center in Florida, and Dr Dawson is a health service researcher with an interest and expertise in promoting inclusivity in research, and she is working at the University of Bristol in the UK. So I'm just going to ask our speakers to briefly introduce themselves and the work that they're doing prior to our panel discussion, and I'll just stop sharing my slides now. So Jamie, do you mind starting us off?
Yes, hello everyone, and thanks, Hannah. I appreciate the opportunity to present with my colleagues today and respond to some of your questions. I am a cancer prevention control researcher, and I have traditionally focused my research in rural communities, focusing in some of the challenges they have engaging and contributing to the research environment. But now that I've moved from Kentucky to the University of Colorado, I've added other communities where I'm learning and working to engage them and participating in creating more representative and more impactful research. And those include the demographically, the Hispanic community is substantial here in Colorado, as well as a common Black and African American community in terms of race and ethnicity, but I also work in the LGBTQ community as well as other socioeconomically challenged communities.
That's great, thank you. Lee, do you mind just briefly introducing yourself?
Yes, good morning and good afternoon for those of you who are in different locations across this world. Again, I'm Lee Green. I bring greetings from Tampa, Florida. As Hannah mentioned, I'm a senior member, or in some cases, it's a full professor in the Health Outcomes and Behavior Department at the Moffitt Cancer Center. I am trained in the area of public health, and my focus throughout my career has been around cancer health disparities. I've been at Moffitt for over 17 years, and much of that time has been spent with a dual role as an administrator and as a researcher. On the administrative side, served as a vice president that was overseeing all of the diversity, equity, inclusion, disparities work, and then also had a hat where I was responsible for all of the public relations and strategic communications efforts at the Cancer Center. But I came to my senses, and about a year ago, I decided to step down from all of my administrative duties and went back to research 100% of my time. So very excited about that. My work falls into, I would say, three buckets. Basically, do a lot of work with men's health disparities, cancer disparities, particularly around prostate cancer. We know that that is a huge area or issue with Black men, with their rates being significantly higher than other populations. And, one of those groups that have low rates of participation in clinical trials and research studies. The second bucket is sort of a new area that I have really been intrigued by, and that is looking at AI and machine learning and its potential to address disparities, or do these tools make disparities worse? So trying to answer some of those questions. And then obviously the final bucket of work is around the topic we're discussing today, minority participation in clinical trials and research studies. And I've been examining this issue since the early 90s and started with looking at issues around trust. Did several studies, published a lot of papers looking at the impact of the Tuskegee syphilis study and how that impacts individuals' decisions to participate or not. And I think many of you are probably familiar with that U.S. Public Health syphilis study at Tuskegee. If you're not familiar with it, one of the things I would encourage you to do is to just take some time and do a little bit of investigating around that. But it's an infamous study that started back in 1932, went for 40 years. And it was a study of 400 Black men who had syphilis. And the investigators, including the government, wanted to know how untreated syphilis would impact the bodies of these men. The men did not know they were part of the study. They thought they were actually being treated. And so it's a well-known study, obviously, in the Black community, and is often cited as a reason why many people do not participate for fear of being a guinea pig. Today, it may not be Tuskegee, but there may be other trust issues that will hamper individuals' ability to participate. I'm sure we'll talk more about that during the discussion. So I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lee. And Shoba, do you mind just briefly introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Shoba Dawson. I'm a research fellow based at the Center for Academic Primary Care, which is part of Bristol Medical School here at University of Bristol in the UK. My journey around equality, diversity, and inclusive research actually started with my PhD, which looked at how we can make patient and public involvement, or as it is known as public engagement in states and in Canada, more inclusive. And over the years, what I've done is I've essentially moved away not just from doing inclusive patient and public involvement and engagement, but also inclusive research overall. So I'm involved in various studies, but my main role in most of these studies, either as PI or as co-investigator, is around increasing ethnic diversity in research. But of course, there are intersectional factors as well, which affect all these different groups. So there is a bit of focus around people who are living in deprived areas as well, and also different geographic location. I don't mainly do work around cancer as such, but the line of research work that I do focuses often on various topic areas, from, eczema to people who have got lower respiratory tract infections, to nocturia, to heart failure, to so on and so forth. So quite often in a lot of studies, we don't exactly know what the prevalence is and whether there are similarities or differences in terms of how different groups are affected by that condition. So that's another space where I do support researchers in terms of how to go about recruiting different groups, what sort of approaches that can be taken to include and involve them. While I've done all these different pieces of work, to a great extent when it comes to EDI, they all go hand in hand, really. Doing good patient and public involvement and engagement often has a massive influence on research participation, recruitment in studies, and also dissemination of findings, and prior to that, retention as well. Looking forward to our discussion. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for those introductions. It's really interesting to hear about sort of how you got involved in this field and the work that you're doing at the moment. So just to kickstart today's panel discussion, a broad question to start. Jamie, I wonder whether you'd mind starting us off by helping us to answer the question about, do you mind explaining what you think some of the barriers are that may prevent underserved populations from participating in research studies?
So I'll start off by actually following Dr. Dawson here in terms, I think it's engagement, and it's a fundamental challenge that we've had, and I often lean on the wise words of Dr. Rob Wynn, who's a cancer center director here in the States at VCU, and it's a fundamental failure to bring the community in. And we often do our scientific histories are doing research to and for people rather than with and from people, with and from communities. And so our opportunity, in my opinion, is to work more closely with the communities that we're trying to serve and collaborate with in our research and changing the framework. And of course, I'm speaking in generalities because we have pockets of scientists who are doing this already with good outcomes and good success. And it's also not foolproof in terms of a guaranteed strategy, because sometimes our interests do not align well with the communities that we're trying to serve. And we need to learn that that's okay. And that it is a matter of community, working with communities to establish joint priorities and to respect those community preferences and wants and desires, and to sustain engagement over time. And I think to be trustworthy, persistently, sustainably trustworthy over time as a way to address some of the shortcomings of our scientific predecessors in their approach to engaging communities. And Dr. Green, mentioned a pinnacle of an example that has undermined trust in the United States in research and across the world because people have heard about that. But unfortunately, that's not the only example. There are many legion examples of this in different communities that have their stories. And we need to not avoid that, but also not assume that it is the determining factor, but rather to engage and be present with the communities, invest in the communities that we're trying to collaborate with, and be trustworthy in a way that that the community can see participation in research as valuable as a contribution to their own potential health, their community's health, and the potential health of future generations.
And Lee or Shoba, do you have anything to sort of follow on from some of the barriers that Jamie's mentioned?
I mean, Jamie hit the nail on the head with regards to engagement. I mean, that is, I think, the number one thing that we need to do as institutions is to make sure that we're engaging with the community. So that's absolutely job number one. And what I want to link to that, so that we just don't take it for granted that this is going on, but oftentimes we don't provide the proper awareness, the proper education to the communities with regards to clinical trials, research studies. We take it for granted that if we build it, they will come, and that is absolutely not true. So a part of that engagement is absolutely going out, providing the awareness, providing the information, and oftentimes there's insufficient dissemination of information about our research studies, particularly within minority communities. And if they are not aware, if there is no knowledge about what's going on at a place like a Moffitt, people, when they are approached to participate in a clinical trial or research study, they're going to say no because they have no clue what this is all about. And so agree 100% with Jamie, but just wanted to add that piece of about lack of awareness and information.
And Shoba, is there anything that you'd like to add to what Lee's just mentioned?
Absolutely. In fact, I think both Jamie and Lee have mentioned most of the things I had in mind, really. Just to add on to that would be, for example, communities are really willing and want to take part in research. It's just that we often think as researchers sat in our ivory towers that groups are hard to reach. They are not. They are just easily ignored groups. Having done some community engagement work last week, one of the things the groups I was with said to me was, oh, how do I even find out about these research opportunities? Where do you even advertise? Most of the work that we do goes through GP surgeries. So that's through the primary care aspect, really. And to date, most of them have lived in the same place, going to the same GP practice for quite a long period of time. And not one of them have been approached by the GP practice to date. So there is something, that is to be, reconsidered and rethought of, really. So I think it's not that there are barriers for these groups to take part. It's about, how we approach them. Are we actually approaching them? Are the people whom we are working with, who are part of the research team, approaching them at all or not? So there is something here about cultural competency as well, or cultural safety, if you like, really, from the researchers. And I think they need to be better trained and they need to have better knowledge so that they know what sort of approaches are appropriate in terms of, approaching different communities, not to really think about language as a barrier. And that means that, they can't speak in English. That means they won't be able to take part in the study.
And Jamie, I can see that you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just some such terrific comments but I wanted to follow up to add on that I think this is also a value system challenge, and not in the sense that the community has values that are the problem. It's actually our issues as our value system, and we make assumptions about the value systems of others and not really invest the time and energy to learn those value systems and how to put the research opportunities in the context of someone else's value system, and not simply assuming that we share a value system. And that, moving toward that is not just engaging some communities when we have an ask about research, but being present in these communities in a trustworthy way when we don't have an ask. That is our investment in relationship development and creating opportunities and being trustworthy over time in order that generate opportunities. And sometimes it's not us, sometimes it's our colleagues and partners, but working toward reestablishing a trustworthiness and a presence in those communities when we're not there to make a specific ask.
And Lee, yeah.
Jamie, you were reading my mind because as I was clicking the raise my hand button, you talked about one of the issues that I wanted to add. And one of the things that we work with our leaders here and researchers at Moffitt is to go into the community when you don't want anything. go in and participate in the activities of the community, not when you're asking for something, but if there are activities happening, and we try to get our CEO to go out into the community, the CEO of Moffitt to go out into the community, to be with them, to understand the needs of the community, not when there's something that you're asking for. So, Jamie, you're a good mind reader. I appreciate that.
And Shoba?
Just to add on to what's already been said, really, it's also about reciprocity. So it's about like focusing on, for example, the key individuals that you work with in order to access the community. There might be things or ways in which you can support them. So, for example, some of the people I'm working with, they want to have like add more qualifications, for instance, like a postgrad qualification, etc. It's then trying to see how you can support them and facilitate that process. It's not just about me going into the community for a particular purpose. It's also seeing how else I can help and support them as well. It may fit within the remit of what I'm doing. It may not. And in cases where it doesn't, it's about then me helping and signposting them and supporting them so that they find the information and the support that they need as well. And that's quite key and crucial. It's not just going in for achieving a particular purpose and then going back and not feeding back to the communities at all. So essentially all I'm getting at is it shouldn't be tokenistic. It should involve a lot of reciprocity, and it's about building that mutual trust and that relationship as well and nurturing it so that it's not something that's one-off, but you try and sustain it over a period of time.
And I think a lot of you have sort of touched upon this in the answers that you've given to the first question. But two things really. How do you think that researchers can go about locating and recruiting underserved populations into their research studies? And as part of that, I wonder whether you mind sort of describing from your experience what you would define as an underserved population. And I might ask Shoba if you don't mind sort of starting off that one.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So to begin with, according to me, underserved groups are those, for example, they are hardly ever included in research in comparison to, what you would expect people to get involved based on the overall population. These are also groups that have got higher healthcare burden, but which is not something that is matched by the amount of research work that takes place, either including them, involving them, or for or on them as well, for on or about them as well. And then lastly, there are certain important differences in groups in terms of the way they respond to a particular intervention or treatment. And quite often research neglects these. So, so anyone who comes under those three categories, I would consider them to be underserved. In terms of my own experience, it's not necessarily a trial. It's a big study wherein we are funded by Pfizer to look at how many people each year get diagnosed with chest infections within primary care setting, because we don't really know whether it affects particular groups or subgroups over others. Etc. So for this study, what I did was I worked with various local communities with whom I already had established links. And we did two things as such. One, to develop information sheets and video formats so that it helps and supports those who may have low literacy levels, and in order to ensure that there is accessibility and ensure that everyone who could possibly benefit from that research have got access to that piece of research. And then secondly, it's also about enlightening the communities that without them, we can't do research, and why it is important for them to take part in research. So we co-produced 2 videos with them. And we have not just done this in English, we have done this in 10 other languages apart from English as well. And as part of it, a lot of process was involved. So developing the script together, translating them so that it's also available as a script in those languages for those who don't want to watch the video. And then for those who can't read or write in their own language, you have it in video format, and also for accessibility.
And Lee, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, absolutely. Agree, 100% with Shoba's comments. The other thing I'll say is that we have at Moffitt worked extremely hard to try to develop culturally tailored recruitment materials, making sure that they're culturally sensitive, that they are inclusive. And, as in my role as vice president that oversees public relations, strategic communications, work very closely with the marketing team to make sure that all of our brochures, flyers, advertisements, all those types of things show great diversity, that they represent all of the communities that are part of our catchment area, using images, using language, particularly working with African American men on prostate cancer, making sure that anything that we use are those things that they can connect with, so that when we're asking them to participate, they can say, oh yeah, this looks like it includes people that look like me. I think Shoba mentioned multiple languages, making sure we are addressing that. And one cool thing that we have done is that we have a profile of patients, and one piece of that is that we do video profiles of community members, real people who have participated in clinical trials, to tell their story, about their experience participating in a research study or clinical trial at the Moffitt Cancer Center, and really trying to share that information with the community. I can go on, but social media, leveraging social media, digital platforms, all those things I think are important, particularly with minority communities, because they spend a lot of time on social media and digital platforms.
And Jamie?
Yeah, so I want to I guess double down on the co-design and the themes that both Shoba and Lee have mentioned. This is another way to bring the community in. When you hear their perspectives and work together on designing outreach activities, whether it's as simple as a study flyer or choosing a particular platform that resonates with a community, we don't know, but the community does. And if we can develop a trusting relationship, we can share that information. But I do stop just a little bit short of saying that the community is always right. We do have knowledge and information to bring to the table to be partners in this. And it is only through sustained relationships that are built on trust that we can comfortably argue together, and why we don't want to use certain images that sometimes resonate with the community but send the wrong message, or certain words that resonate with the community but aren't necessarily aligned with how we want to frame our research. And we can think of certain examples that maybe we don't go into that, but we just need to be able to work together to share our expertise so that we can put together something that is unique and particularly targeted, like Lee was saying, and really resonates with that community and engages, not persuades, but engages them to make informed choices about how they allocate their time, energy, and efforts. We hope that's in our research studies, but we respect when it's not. The other thing that I want to layer onto what Shoba was saying is, I think she was incredibly optimistic in a good way to pursue cultural competence. I fall a little bit short of that. I think what we need is cultural humility, in terms of not assuming, but openness to learn and understand. I don't know that I will ever be sufficiently or culturally competent to work and navigate in the Hispanic LGBTQ community. I don't walk in that world, but I can be humble and listen and understand and work toward and strive toward developing those. But that is their expertise in that in their community context that they can bring into the equation. And as long as I keep my ears open and it's very hard for me to listen twice and talk once, but that's the kind of the environment that we really do want to try and create. And so I want to strive for cultural competence, but accept perhaps that cultural humility is the best that I can achieve more fully, and in order to work with communities.
And Lee?
Yeah, that's great. The only other thing I'd like to add, and certainly don't want us to finish this conversation without mentioning this, and interesting that I am in the state of Florida where there's a attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But one of the things that I think is important is that that as an institution, we strive and we work hard to make sure that our researchers, our leaders represent the community, so that when people are approached to participate in research studies, clinical trials, they see researchers that look like them. And I think that's critically important. If they're coming into an institution and they don't see anybody who look like them that represent their communities, there may not be a whole lot of trust there. And so I think that's something I just wanted to toss in. Hopefully, the Florida government is not listening to this conversation, but I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. Sorry.
And Shoba, I can see your hands raised.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think apologies if it wasn't very obvious. Yeah, I think it's more of a language thing, really. We do use the terminology cultural competency, cultural safety, depending on who you're working with. They do use all sorts of different terminologies. I think the reason why I particularly mentioned that was because I have specifically seen people who are, in right in the middle of it all in terms of actually recruiting study participants, wherein there have been occasions where someone has thought very strongly that we shouldn't include a particular individual in the study. Why? Because they can't speak in English. And I think that is absolute and complete ignorance. And it is also quite unfair. And that just perpetuates more health inequalities, really. And it's about training people and ensuring maybe a better way to phrase it would be to teach people how to not be racist, I suppose. So, so that they approach everyone irrespective of language barriers or any other barriers that they may have. Secondly, to add on to what Lee was mentioning, I think you really need buy-in from institutions, and you need to ensure that we do have a good workforce that is reflective of the population as well. To a great extent, we don't always have that. And also, this means that those who actually take part in the studies are the numbers are really, really low. So for example, within the medical school, having spoken to quite a few trial managers to identify what the numbers are for people from minority ethnic groups taking part, it's less than 1% of people from minority ethnic groups take part in studies run by the medical school, wherein when you look at Bristol population, 28% of Bristol population identify themselves as someone from a minority ethnic background. So we do have a very long way to go.
And Jamie, I can see your hand raised as well.
Yeah, I love these points about diversity within our research teams, within academia is vitally important. And another way to achieve that is inviting our community partners to be co-investigators on our teams, that they are present in our research team meetings, to having community co-PIs, because they're in recognizing that expertise at the research team level. It's not that we just go to them, it's that they are part of us, and that's bringing the community in. Other ways to do this are obviously community advisory boards that you can run and operate, and I think we recognize that we need to recognize those are scientific skills, and that engaging these communities is science. It's not a precursor to science. It is science. It is the scientific method to add on and engage our communities like this. And that's part of where we want to engage our funders to understand that relationship development and engagement is part of the process, and it's a fundable part of the process. It's not something that we have to do independently before the grant starts. To bring the community in, we want that to be part of the equation. And so bringing community in by co-designing, by working with community partners as investigators or co-investigators or co-leaders or co-principal investigators, and bringing that engagement piece as into our scientific process as a fundable entity. All different ways of bringing the community into our processes to make sure we're putting our science in the context that and taking responsibility for that. This is our responsibility. The last point I'll make before letting Lee comment one more time is that, of course, the best time to have done all of this was 30 years ago. The next best time is right now. The next best time is right now, and to start thinking and modifying our systems, our research to include these components, and to recognize these as scientific skills.
Jamie, I really appreciate you providing specific examples of this whole issue of engagement around the research team, creating community advisory boards, working with community organizations. And, the only other piece I want to add there is, we often put a lot of time and effort into creating these community advisory boards. Well, in some of these communities, organizations already exist that we could go to solicit their information, feedback on the work that we're doing at the Cancer Center. So, fraternities and sororities, depending on what part of the world you're on, those are huge. There are other men's groups that we go to. 100 Black Men, for example, in Tampa is a huge partner for us, so that when we are doing anything around prostate cancer in Black men, we go to them, show them our materials, talk about our research. And to your point, Jamie, we invite, their leader to be a part of our research team, or invite them to be a part of our patient advisory committee as well. So I really appreciate those specific examples, because I think that'll help our listeners. Thank you.
And I think screening and recruitment is one thing. And I guess the other thing that comes with that is managing retention. So Lee, I wondered whether you can talk a little bit about how you manage retention in some of the studies that you are working on at the moment.
Yeah, great question. Because you're absolutely right. We focus so much on recruitment. Retention is huge. We have, numbers that indicate that people are not staying on to many of our research studies. But, for me, the most obvious thing that we need to do is to make sure that we provide clear information, clear study information, clear expectations, communicate clearly about the procedures of the study, the expectations. And I think more importantly, particularly for some of the communities that we're dealing with, clear benefits to the participants directly, and clear benefits to the community. It may not directly benefit you, but your participation in the study could in fact help someone down the road, someone in your community down the road. And so being flexible with the accommodations, the study logistics, when the visit schedules are, because I think it may have been Jamie or Shoba, is that oftentimes we come to this from our perspective and we set up our study that's best for us. Well, maybe it's best for us to meet with people after office hours, because that's when they get off work. That's when they can have childcare. And so being very flexible with what we're requiring these individuals to do would be absolutely critical. And then, Jamie, I hate to say this, but your engagement piece is coming back to the forefront here. And as we are doing the study, we have to maintain that engagement. It's not just at the beginning, but throughout the study, we have to make sure that we are regularly communicating with our participants on the progress of the study and on the community, making sure that the community is we keep them up to date in terms of how things are going. I mean, I keep going on and on, but I want to hear from Jamie and Shoba.
Yeah, Jamie, if you want to come in here.
Yeah, and I think building on what Lee was saying is very interesting and exciting. So one, I completely agree. We need to be more flexible, and paired with that, honest in our scientific description of how we did things and the flexibility. And this is where I think implementation science is helping to inform how we think about our work. And that in truth, this balance between internal validity and external validity and generalizability of our studies. Yes, we want to strive to be, have an internal validity and control, but being honest about the adaptations that we had to make to have a successful study, to have impact, and to be able to have the space in our journals, in our scholarly publications to talk about that, because it's the right thing to do to support community. There are just so many shortcuts that we can take to accrual that will compromise retention and adherence. And it's the investment of time, energy, and alignment of values and supports. Because remember, power is not determined, scientific power and statistical power is not determined by accrual. It's determined by retention and adherence. And being scientifically honest about what we needed, how we needed to adapt our accrual procedures, our engagement procedures to retain and support individuals to complete studies and trials is critically important. And I recognize that sometimes people might interpret those as threats to the internal validity of a study because we're moderating and adapting things. But I think that if we can describe how we did that in our scholarly dissemination efforts, then we're contributing to a better understanding of not only that internal validity, but the external validity of what we have and creating that understanding of what is going to take for this to be generalizable as well. And so it's obviously it's a trade-off, but it's one that we want to think carefully and cautiously about and how we adapt it.
And Shoba?
Thank you. I think Lee and Jamie have covered quite a lot of the points already, but just a couple of things to add on to that would be thinking about it from a flexibility standpoint, where needed, for example, offering childcare support or like providing transport to get to the space where you need the participants to come to do the study. All those things go a long way. Quite often what I find with researchers is that they feel like, oh, we have made efforts for translation, interpretation, we have got multilingual field workers, we don't need to do anything else. And I think that's a very wrong attitude to take. What is needed is ensuring that you keep community up to date and there is that feedback as well happening in between, because for example, trials, they often take a very long period of time, sometimes go on for years together. So you can't just start at some point and then go on without providing people with any update in terms of what's happening for a year or year and a half, and then expect people to again engage in the trial like how they did at the beginning. So what is needed is that, piece of information either in the form of newsletters, but that's again taking an easy way out really. So it would be good if people can go into communities and update them in terms of what's happened with the studies so far. And of course, all these things require time and resources. And that's why it's quite important that at the very beginning, people think about all these things in terms of how they can inclusively design their research studies and ensure that there is adequate resources to cover all these different aspects as well. Because without this, you're not going to effectively be able to engage with study participants throughout the period of the study. And lastly, sometimes, people do follow-ups for a prolonged period of time. I think it's about sensibly thinking to what extent those follow-ups are actually needed to see those differences, and to what extent people are just doing it for the sake of doing it as well. So do you need to do, for example, a 6, 12, and an 18-month follow-up, or would a 6 and a 12-month follow-up, for example, be sufficient? So again, ensuring that you practically think about, what's needed and design things accordingly so that it's not overtly onerous on the participants as well.
Jamie, I can see your hand raised there.
Yeah, I just really love the points that Shoba is making about the reciprocity, and that is not easy. We get wrapped up in our science and forget to do some of those things. And so having a communication plan about a priori how you're going to periodically update and engage them. I received another tip that I learned from a community partner. And in terms of learning how to wear, what life is like in their shoes. And the first mistake that we often make is that we show up and we're immediately asking for a letter of support without any history of engagement. And it's not that. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we're working in a new community, a new opportunity, and sometimes that happens. But you're already, on your heels when you're doing that because you don't have the relationship. But the two things that I learned from this community partner was to when that has to happen, to engage and allocate a lot of time to that process as much as you can before you ultimately need a deadline for that ask of that letter to work as quickly as you can to build relationships. But in your letter of support, to be honest, we often write these letters of support for our community colleagues. In those letters, embed reciprocity. The letter cannot be just, or it can be. Most letters are about what the community is going to do for us, what the community commits to do for us. What are we going to do to commit to the community? And there are some simple ways to do that. Return the investment. How are you going to utilize resources? Okay, we never have enough money to do these community advisory boards in our project budgets and things like that. But how we spend those funds matter. Do we make the community show up on campus, or do we hold our community advisory board meetings at a community restaurant where we're investing resources that we have in their community? In their local economy, supporting the restaurants that they want to support, or support the meeting locations that they are comfortable with and stuff, where we do the travel and we do the preparations, but the resources, the finances are then left in the community, and honoring their contributions with honoraria for participating in community advisory boards, but in other ways, leaving resources in the community. And it's another way of demonstrating that reciprocity, that engagement, that commitment, that sustainment, that you're thinking of that community and their well-being overall, not just what that community organization can do for you. But these are simple ways, and you can write these into your letter of support. And say that that the community recognizes that this investigator or this investigative team will work with us and hold community advisory board meetings in our community center or in our local restaurants or things like that.
Yes, I think this is absolutely included in the comments from Shoba and Jamie, but I want to be very, very clear about this and something that we often take for granted, and that is regularly expressing our gratitude for their participation. As often as we can, we need to thank them for their contribution to the study and emphasize how important it is that we have their involvement. So as much as we can acknowledge their participation, share with them how much we value their participation is important. And lastly, is figuring out a way to highlight the significance of their participation in advancing the knowledge and improving, health outcomes for all people, particularly those within their community. So, we don't say it directly, but oftentimes we forget to just simply thank our participants for their participation.
And just lastly, just before we close today's webinar, it is being recorded and it will be available on the ISBNPA webpage, and I'll put the link in the chat in a second so that you can access that. But just before we close, do you mind just sort of providing any sort of key information or maybe key research papers that might be good for somebody that wants to learn a little bit more about this area and apply it to some of the research that they're doing? Shoba, do you mind starting that one?
Yeah, thank you. So from a UK perspective, we have the NIHR, that's the National Institute for Health and Care Research, Include Ethnicity Framework, which essentially tells you about all the different things you need to consider in order to ensure that how you can design research or trials that is as inclusive as possible. Something related to that and linked to that, which I led on developing, is the Trial Forge 3 guidance, which talks about how we can recruit and retain ethnic minority groups in trials as well. But apart from that, there are various sources around co-production, for instance, which people should be easily able to access via Google search, for instance. But those are the two key ones that I can think of. And related to Trial Forge guidance is that there are a couple of other frameworks that are coming about, like the impaired capacity to consent framework and also socioeconomic disadvantage framework as well. So if people look for Trial Forge website, and I'm happy to add that to the chat, you will be able to find more information about those frameworks. Again, they are all, please bear in mind, from a UK perspective that I know of that I'm suggesting. Thank you.
And Lee or Jamie, is there anything in addition to that you want to add?
I'm a little bit biased here, but I do want to just throw it out, and that is on the issue of trust. There are a lot of incredible papers out there that address this issue. I sent you, Hannah, in a slide a number of papers that I've been involved in looking at the issue of trust. And maybe it's something I could do is just provide a link to some of those studies for the listeners today. But particularly around, if you're not familiar with Tuskegee, I think you should. That's something from a historical perspective you should be familiar with. And I know Jamie mentioned, which is absolutely true, that's just one area. There are many others that if you do a quick search on the internet, you can find some of those other areas as well. And great. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just going to have to, we're coming up to 3 p.m. UK time, and unfortunately the webinar cuts off quite abruptly at 3 p.m. So what I've done is all of our speakers for today's webinar are happy for you to contact them via email. Their email addresses are on the screen here if you do have any questions, or maybe we haven't been able to get through all of your questions today. But I just want to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to all three of our speakers. It's been incredible listening about the work that you're doing, and I'm sure all of us have learned a lot, which we will apply to our research. So again, sorry for the relatively abrupt ending, but I just want to really thank you for your time and experience today.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hannah. Lovely to see you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks and take care.
All right.